What's going on? What's going on out there, good people? What's going on? What's going on out there, good people? This is Hype Jones, and it is what it is. It is what it is. Shouts out. Thank you for the ATR family for putting this platform together. It is what it is, coming to you live every Friday at 8 o'clock. Every Friday at 8 o'clock. I'm glad you tuning in. Make sure you share. Today, when I got my mail, guess what I got today? I got my absentee ballot today, y'all. And in it, I live in the state of Georgia. For those people who don't know, the absentee ballot is changed a lot. They put a lot of language and conversation on the absentee ballot, but this is information that I think that is easy for us to make sure that we can overcome. I think the biggest issue we need to do in this community is make sure you either have an identification card or a driver's license as soon as possible. Identification card or driver's license as soon as possible. They are targeting African Americans because they think that we don't have driver's license and ID cards, and we're going to prove them wrong this year and next year. So what I'm asking you to do is go out there, share. Hey, Miss Jones, or faithful Miss Jones, I appreciate you for joining in on the show. Looking forward to going and having some good dialogue, some good conversation today. We're going to talk about the structure and the makeup of the U.S. government, and then we're going to break down how that structure plays into local politics, as well as making sure we cover, like I said before, it is voting season, November the 2nd across these United States of America. Well, in the state of Georgia, I'm going to say voting in the state of Georgia, November the 2nd in the state of Georgia. We have elections across the state of Georgia. We have all kind of municipalities that have stood up and standing up. Shouts out to Swainsboro. We got a young lady on that ballot right there in Swainsboro. Shout outs to her. Shout outs to Jessup. We got Jessup, Georgia here in the state of Georgia. You got Atlanta elections going on right now. We got elections right here in Chatham County, Port Wentworth, Garden City, Tybee Island, Bloomingdale. We have elections across the state of Georgia that is going to change the scope of how we look when it comes down to 2022. And so I'm asking you once again to please share. Give me just a second, y'all. Give me just a second. Got to make sure we don't lose no power here, y'all. I don't know what happened. We got to make sure we share. And we got to make sure we share. All right, give me just a second, y'all. Yes, sir. I'm back. I apologize for that. We got to make sure we share. As we go out there and share. Give me 2 seconds and I'll make sure I get us moving and motivated. Yes, ma'am. We're going to share. So, like I said today, today's show is going to be talking about the U.S. government, and how the power structure of the U.S. government serves our community, how the U.S. government serves our community. And so the U.S. government is broken down into three parts. It is the legislative, which makes the laws. They comprise of the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. And then you have the executive branch, which carries out the laws. Those are the president, the vice president, the cabinets, and most federal agencies. And then you have what you call the judicial branch, which evaluates the laws. And that's the Supreme Court and other courts throughout these United States of America. And so with those three different structures of government created, when America was created, those are the ones who lay down the roots as far as the land is concerned. You have the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch. And we broke it down in these three components. And because these three components are different branches, the government structure that we come up with was created to make sure that they kept each other in check. And so when we talk about keeping them in check, you got the president who can veto anything that the legislative branch creates by Congress. And then it also makes sure it makes the nominations for federal agencies. And then we talk about Congress. Congress can confirm or reject the president's nominees. and can also remove the president from office in exceptional circumstances. So when we want to remove somebody out of office, as far as the president is concerned, then Congress can step in and do those things. And the justice of the Supreme Court, they can overturn unconstitutional laws and are nominated by the president and then confirmed by the Senate. Donnie Black, what's going on with you people? And so basically, because of these different kind of groups, because we have the legislative branch, we have the executive branch and the judicial branch, we have a rule of government that protects us as citizens of these United States. Now, when we talk about the legislative branch, I told you earlier, they confirm and reject nominations from the president, as far as when he wants to put people in charge of federal agencies or federal judges or even Supreme Courts, and they also have the authority to declare war. And so when we need to go to war, the legislative branch is the authority. They can have that they have that authority to make sure we declare war. Now, this branch includes what I said earlier. It includes the Congress, which made up of the senators, and it's also made up of the House of Reps. And so, and along with special agencies and officers that provide support service for Congress, American citizens have the right to vote for senators every 6 years, and they vote representatives every 2 years freely. And they do that through a confidential ballot. And so basically, when we're talking about legislative branch, they're the ones who put laws into effect. And the reason why I pick on them harder than I'm going to pick on the other two is because when we talk about the legislative branch, it's very, 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 very important for us to make sure that every 2 years, whoever represents us in the House of Representatives is somebody who's going to take care of all people. Now, we can talk about not my buddy, who is actually my representative, but guess what? He is not over the last, I think he's been in office 8 years, has not fulfilled that term. Now, when you talk about power, when you put people in these positions, they're able to make sure that they change the narrative, not just in our community, but for the whole United States of America as a whole. And in current terms, right now, the legislative branch, when we talk about Congress, the majority is being ruled by the Democratic Party, because you have 48 senators tied to the Democratic Party, and you have 2 independents, and then the tiebreaker is done by the vice president, who serves as the president of the Senate. And so basically, when we talk about the power structures that be, we need to understand government, because understanding government will actually help us out learning what we need to do next. And so when we talk about Congress, we're talking about the House of Reps and the U.S. Senate. And those two groups are the ones who are responsible for creating laws for our country to make sure that our country has fair and prudent process. Right now, 2 things that are very, very, very important that are going through the halls of the Senate right now is when you talk about the John Lewis bill. And we're talking about John Lewis bill, which would take care of the rights of America when it comes to voting rights for the whole United States of America. Because if you notice anything, last week I talked about it, all these states are hijacking, all these states are hijacking the way they vote, because they understand we're 50 states that make the United States. And so if they divide us into 50 states and they control the narrative of how we go out there and vote, because we went out there and we changed the conversation last year and how we vote, that is how we change the narrative as far as moving forward is concerned. And so now I'm going to flip over to the executive branch. The executive branch is the branch of U.S. government that carries out and enforces the law. They're the ones that we know of as president, vice president, the cabinet, executive department, independent agencies, and other boards, commissions, and committees. They all come in the executive branch. Now, mind you, the executive branch is not just in the United States government when you talk about the president. We also have executive branches here in our community, like the city of Savannah. City of Savannah has a mayor and an alderman. That is what you call the executive branch, but they also serve as the legislative branch too in local government structures. And that same conversation can be said for any other municipality out there, but it also stays true to when we talk about the county commission, when you have a county commission chair who serves as a CEO. But in serving as a CEO, guess what? By him serving as the CEO, he also has executive power, but he has legislative power because he also serves over the county commission. There's a legislative body of the county. And then you also can talk about the governor. The governor is an executive branch member too. And he has a House and a Senate as well. That House and Senate serve as far as the legislative branch, but the governor serves in the executive branch. And I should have highlighted that earlier. We have the state House and we have the state Senate, which also is the legislative branch for the state of Georgia. And so I want you to understand, this is not just true for the United States of America. This is also for the state of Georgia. And then it all could be played down in the local level when we talk about county and when we're talking about municipalities. And so when we talk about the key roles of the executive branch, we want to talk about the president. The president is the one who leads the area, leads the country, or leads that body of people. He or she also is the head of the state. And in the case of the president, they're the head of the federal government, and they're what you call the commander-in-chief is what we call them. And they're in charge of all the military, any war, anything like that. And in most cases, they serve a term. Some places they serve a 2-year term. Some places they serve a 4-year term. But they serve a term because what we want to do is to keep democracy. Is we want to make sure somebody has to be reelected so often because we want to make sure we have people in play that are going to be for the people. And that also goes for those people in those legislative seats too. They come from a 2-year term. As far as the House is concerned, House of Reps do a 2-year term, and the U.S. Senators do a 6-year term, unless it's a special election, of course, where somebody vacates a seat. But in modern terms, they follow through those terms. And like I said earlier, the vice president is the supporting agent of the president. So if anything ever happens to the president, the vice president is the one who steps in the gate as far as that's concerned. But the other piece to that piece is, the other caveat to that is, in the United States of America, the vice president also serves over the Senate in the United States of America. And so that vice president has a dual purpose, a dual role position in this country. And so when we go to the next thing, we talk about the cabinet. And the cabinet is usually a group of people who advise the president, the vice president, on the decisions they need to make on behalf of this country. And this includes the vice president and the head of all the executive board, executive department, and other high-ranking government officials. And it's very important for us to understand and know who these people are. Because you know why? Because in the Senate, if the Senate splits 50-50, then the vice president, who's the head of the Senate, becomes the majority leader who can say this 50 or this 50 needs to rule and pass on that piece right there. And I want you to understand that much of the work of the executive branch is done by federal agencies, departments, committees, and other groups. And so that same conversation can be had when we talk about localized government. When you talk about the mayor, or when you talk about the county chair, both of them are an important part of them is to develop committees that actually can move the narrative forward. And so that's why you have a CAT board, you have an MPC board, you have a hospital board, homeless authority. All those different authorities fall under the premise as far as the chair of the county or as the mayor of the city of Savannah or of a municipality. And so when you have these people, their responsibility prime time wise is to make sure they appoint effective people onto these committees. So when you say your hospitals aren't doing something right, that's because the executive branch didn't appoint the right kind of people, or maybe people of this present age, to make sure they take care of what the needs are with the hospital. And the same thing can be for transportation. When you talk about Chatham Area Transit in Georgia, or when you talk about transportation like Amtrak, or when you talk about transportation like MART up in Atlanta, when you have these things, these authorities there are appointments that come from the executive branches of these municipalities and these counties that make sure that narrative is forward as far as those federal designations are concerned. And so I want that to be understood how important that executive branch is, because the executive branch is tied to the president, it's tied to the executive departments, it also has sub-agencies, independent agencies, board commissions and committees, and it also, you have what you call quasi-official agencies like cities, municipalities. Those are quasi-official organizations because you know what? They don't always maneuver in the way counties maneuver or states maneuver or even the federal government maneuver, because they want to get into the nuts and bolts as far as how their body of people actually need responsive government to work. And then the last part is the judicial branch. The judicial branch. Those are the judges, y'all. The judges interpret the meaning of the law. I'm going to say that again. The judges interpret the meaning of the law. They apply laws to individual cases, and they decide if laws violate the Constitution, if it is compromised, if it is comprised of a Supreme Court and it's comprised of a Supreme Court and other federal courts out there. And the reason why the judicial branch is so important is because they're the ones who interpret the law. Now, we already heard the legislative branch creates the law. The executive branch executes the law. And the judicial branch interprets the law. And so when we ever talk about murder or cases tied to how things should be done in our community, or how a leader should be elected in our community, and let's say it's valid for interpretation. And in most cases, you're talking about court cases. I know when we talk about judicial branch, we think somebody done killed somebody done raped somebody done did something heinous of a crime. But there are other judicial cases that set precedents for later cases to actually be heard. And so it's so important for us to make sure that judicial branch people are the right kind of people for us. Because when it comes down to decisions, if it's not somebody who's sensitive to understand the nature of what our problems are, then we're going to keep losing on those levels. And so, as we know, the Supreme Court is the highest court of all courts. And then you have your federal courts, and then you have those lower tier courts like your recorders courts, your Supreme Court, superior courts, all your other courts, municipal courts, all your other courts that are down lower level courts that are very, very, very important to the everyday ordinary person. A lot of these courts elected positions, or judges as we call them in our community, a lot of these judges have to be on the ballot, just like our executive branch leaders and our legislative branch leaders. But you know what? We pay little to no attention to those judges, and then those judges get in those political positions as far as power is concerned to make the interpretation of the laws. And we lose because you know why? We did not put the right people in those positions. Okay, the conversation as far as getting the information out there, like my good friend Ramona said, the 101 is already done. Yes, this is basic 101 information. However, because we vote in such low turnout numbers, this basic information had to be repeated, because you know why? For some reason, we keep not finding people willing to step up and get into those legislative positions, in those executive positions, and even in most cases, those judicial positions. And I understand the judicial positions are a lot harder to get involved in because you have to have the law degree. Now, at one point in time, you didn't need a law degree to get in some of these. A magistrate court is what I was thinking of. You didn't need a law degree to get a magistrate court. But what was happening is you were starting to have a higher turnover rate as far as people who were common people who made things fair to start getting these magistrate seats. And so guess what? They started making sure they pushed the fact that lawyers got involved in that. And see, I'm the highest proponent of, I'm not about lawyers, and I understand lawyers understand law better than most people because they're the ones who have to do the battle as far as the interpretation of the law. And what they've always come to me and said, well, when we talk about state reps, state senators, or U.S. House reps and U.S. House senators, we need to be incorporating lawyers into those positions because they know how to write laws. I understand with the monolithic thought process that, but at the same time, we got to broaden our horizon on that, because just because they can interpret the law, just because they're the ones who fight against the interpretation of law, I think that there are enough ordinary people that can get in some of these lower tier positions, like the state senate, the state house, even your mayors, even your county commission, and even all the people, your commissioners on those seats. I think that we can have better representation on there if we truly understand the basic political science of 101 politics and understanding the three government branches. And I know I spent 20 minutes of your life and said, I learned that in high school. I learned that in economics. I learned that in U.S. history. I understand we learned that, but for some odd reason, we have not found a way to apply what we learned. And guess what? We need to make sure that we're pushing the narrative forward to push those kind of right people in play. Shout outs to one of my favorite representatives. He's on the chat, Derek Milo. How you doing, my friend? And he said, I write bills all the time, not a lawyer. I do just fine because policy that's written into law doesn't need to be done by a lawyer. And you're absolutely right. And he will probably tell you that if you got an idea when you become an elected official, you can take that idea and they have a group of lawyers in that room that will help you put that idea into writing and to make sure we push it into the House. So it's so important that we have elected officials like Brother Milo who's paying attention to local people like myself, small people like myself, to make sure that we're hearing the message and we're hearing the message clear. And so shout outs. I appreciate Derek for listening. But we have to make sure that in our communities, we have the right executive branch leaders, the right legislative branch leaders, and the right judicial branch leaders. Because when we see these slated cases, and I'm going back and I'm going to drop the B word, when we talk about Black America and we say we see unfair treatment in the judicial system, when we see that, when I see it numerous times, I saw it yesterday. I saw a young lady. She was African American. I saw a young lady. She was Caucasian, and they went to the same judge. And the African American had 5-6 less infractions against her than the white lady. And then the African American actually said, she pled guilty, and the white lady pled guilty, and they got different sentences. And the reason why this happens in America is because we aren't involved in the judicial system and we're not involved in the elected position. And we have to make sure that we got the right people representing us. They determine if it's conditional or not, and the words you use, like shall or as nearly as possible or must, those words can change the dynamics of a bill. And you're absolutely and he said it's constitutional. Y'all got that. And I appreciate you, Derek, for helping us out with that piece right there. It's so important for us to make sure that we have people that represent people. And so I know in my current community, there's a lot of conversation going on because one of my state seats is up for election. And it's up for election, and 5 people are vying for that state seat. And I had a conversation with somebody the other day who actually lives in that district. And my conversation with them was, I said, well, do you realize something's going on? First off, they didn't even know that the person who used to be in the seat was no longer in the seat. And they didn't even know the person had been deceased. And so that's one issue that we have to deal with. The other issue was they didn't even know that an election is on the ballot come November. And we cannot be that as citizens in these United States of America. We have to be in understanding mode. We have to be in hype mode. We have to be in alert mode right now because there's a takeover of American rights coming right on the forefront in 2022. And if you're not ready, then guess what? We're going to lose on that effort. And it's so important that we step up to the gate and we do everything we can to get this thing right, because we're only going to have one chance at it. And depending on who gets in those offices come next year in the state of Georgia, and I'm going to pick on the state of Georgia, shouts out to the other 49 states, but in the state of Georgia, if we do not get this thing right, come 2022, come 2023, I might have to move to Canada. I might have to move to one of these states, because you know what? We need to make sure we stay focused, we stay vigilant, and we stay on guard. There are a lot of people in our community that are not for us. There are a lot of people in our community that are not for us. And there are a lot of laws that were written 10, 15 years ago that are now starting to affect me at my age of 46 that was written when I was 31. And so we have to understand the people we put in the elected position, if they're not doing the job, we need to make sure that we're removing them out of those positions, and we have to get people to step to the gate and get in those shoes and make sure they move the narrative forward to give us the right kind of representation we deserve. So once again, today, I just wanted to give a basic education on the judicial branch, the legislative branch, and the executive branch. I feel like I'm talking to my 9-year-old and giving this information, but we have to understand the structure, the immediate structure of how our community is built. Because if we don't understand the powers of the executive branch within our community, we're going to fail. If we don't understand the power of the legislative community, we're going to fail. And if we don't understand how those judicial people get in office, we're going to keep losing out on what we need to move the narrative forward. When we talk about these conversations, y'all, I am giving you basic information, but really and truly, if you really want to understand this whole thing, America was built on one principle. You know what that one principle was? Economics. They didn't call it economics back then. You know what they called it back then? They called it capitalism. And because of capitalism, that's why we have such divisive ways going on in our country. And it's so important for us to understand the divisiveness of the country so we can understand how we get out of the rut that some of us have gotten into. And you're absolutely right. Simplicity is necessary for great understanding. You're absolutely right. Understanding the structure is important. That's when people realize all elections matter. We got to make sure we understand that if we're not showing up to the polls, we're not showing up to the polls to make sure that executive branch is for the people, the legislative branch is for the people, and the judicial branch is for the people. If we're not showing up to the polls every time it's supposed to be up for us to be able to vote, then we're going to continue to suffer here in America, especially those common people, because guess what? Capitalism understands the importance of voting. Capitalism understands the importance of keeping control of the executive branch, keeping control of the legislative branch, and making sure the judicial branch knows that they're present and accounted for. And economics understands that. We need to have a quick understanding of economics, and maybe I'll do that next week. But this week, I really want to home in super hard on, like my good friend Ramona said, the basics of politics. The basics of politics is understanding the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch. I said it out of order. It should have been the legislative branch, executive branch, and the judicial branch. And understanding how important those three bodies of people, those three groups are, is so crucial to moving the narrative forward in our country. And so when I say that again, I'm going to say it again because I want to make sure we drive this thing home. I'm going to break it down one more time, but I'm going to do the 10-minute versus the 20-minute version of it. You have the executive branch. You have the legislative branch. And the legislative branch is the branch that drafts all the laws. They confirm and reject nominations on behalf of the president to make sure for federal agencies. They also, and the president always understand this, he is so important because he nominates the heads of the federal agencies. He nominates the federal judges. He nominates the Supreme Court. He also has authority when it comes to declaring war. I mean, they also have authority when it comes to declaring war. And so they confirm all those nominations from the president. It's so crucial, it's so important that we have a legislative branch that listens to the people. We have a legislative branch that does the work for the people. It's so important that we move that narrative forward when we talk about the legislative branch and understanding what they do for this country. That branch is so important because guess what? Any law that is written, there are laws that are written 300 years ago. There are laws that are written 30 days ago. There are laws written yesterday. But those laws carry for a lifetime until another law takes that law out of practice. Keep that in mind, y'all, when we're talking about the legislative branch. The legislative branch is the U.S. Congress, and the U.S. Congress is made up of the Senate and the House. And who leads the Senate? The Vice President leads the Senate, which leads me and segues me into the executive branch. And the executive branch is the one who enforces the law or carries out the law. And we talk about the president, the vice president, the cabinet, and the executive departments, independent agencies, and other boards, commissions, and committees. But that same conversation can be segued down to when we talk about local government, when we talk about the mayor and city council, and when we talk about the county commission and the county commissioners. So when we talk about that, but see, the difference between those bodies is when we talk about a mayor and city council, and we talk about the county commission and the commissioners, they serve dual roles. They serve as executive branch and they serve as legislative branch. When you're talking about localized government, when we're talking about tangible government that affects you every single day, as far as street lights, as far as paving streets, as far as taxes, as far as doing splash, as far as all those things are concerned, those are tied to the executive branch. And I know in my county, I can only speak for my county, the chairman is the CEO, which makes him the executive branch leader, and then his county commission serves as a legislative body for the people. And so it's so important for us to understand that that executive branch exists not only in the U.S. government, but it also exists on the local levels, and it also exists in the government structure level too. And what I mean by the government structure level, we're talking about the governor. And we're talking about the governor, you're talking about the lieutenant governor. We're talking about Secretary of State. We're talking about the Attorney General. We're talking about the Ag Commission, Insurance Commissioner. We're talking about the PSC. All those body people are tied to that executive branch when you talk about the state of Georgia. And then when you talk about the legislative branch, you're talking about state senators and state reps. And state senators and state reps in the state of Georgia are different from U.S. senators and U.S. reps, where U.S. senators, they do 6-year terms, and U.S. reps do 2-year terms. All state senators and all state reps in the state of Georgia all do 2-year terms. And it's so important to understand these things because these are people that represent you. We cannot just focus on the president of the United States and then who he picks as far as the vice president is concerned, and watching how he picks those people for the Supreme Court and those appointments, who he puts over the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of Treasury or all those different positions. All that's fine and dandy, and that affects us in the long term. But in the short game, you have people who are in the executive branch that have that same power that we can see on an everyday basis right here in our local government. And so when we talk about those executive branch people, we're talking about the president, vice president, cabinet. And then that segues me into the judicial branch, was the last branch. And the judicial branch is the one that interprets. I'm going to say it again. They interpret the law. And so guess what? When you got people in those judicial seats that interpret the law one way, you got to understand, based on upbringing, where they got their law degree, who they hang with, who they get their money from when they run for office, that's going to help interpret the law. Believe it or not. I'm going to say that again because some of y'all didn't even understand what I just said. And you're absolutely right. Ramona, during the last president's election, he confirmed almost 300, if I want to even say, which changed over the landscape of America because these appointments are lifetime appointments, meaning when they get at that seat, they don't have to leave that seat until they die. And see, we get so caught up in the Supreme Court that we don't understand there's so many small courts out there that affect our everyday lives that can change the scope of how laws are being interpreted. And once again, judicial branch is that interpreting body. And what that means is they get laws. They are the individuals who decide if the law has been violated or it has been sustained. And you're absolutely right. Keep your children out of judicial. Yes, ma'am. Keep your kids out of judicial and penal system. It is so important. But they're the ones who interpret the law. They're the ones who apply law to individual cases. They're the ones who tell you if you're innocent or you're guilty. Now, if you heard what she said, our last president put 200 people who are affiliated to his position, his authority, his thinking. And so what that means is that's going to be an influx of more than 200 people who will affect how we do business in as far as the interpretation of the law in America. And because over 200 people are tied to him, that thinking is now tied to this country. And so that's how important it is to make sure that we show up the presidential elections. That executive branch I spoke of earlier is so important because they are the ones who appoint all these positions. And so when we talk about the judicial branch, it's so important. But I want you to understand when this country was written, it has some checks and balances out there. And I just got on the phone with a good friend. I got to call her back. But they have some checks and balances. And each branch of government had checks and balances like so. The president can veto legislation created by Congress and nominate heads of federal agency. And so that's the big piece that he can do as the president of the United States, as the executive branch of the United States. Congress confirms or rejects the president's nominees and can remove the president from office in exceptional circumstances. That's that legislative body where they can keep a balance on the executive branch. And then the justice of Supreme Court, who can overturn unconstitutional laws, are nominated by the president and then confirmed by the Senate. So the judicial branch is nominated by the executive branch and then confirmed by the legislative branch. That is how this country was formed. We made sure that we had checks and balances in the system. Now, I'm not going to go far left because I told you I was going to take 10 minutes and it only took 7 minutes to do that conversation. Legal interpretation for decades. And you're right. It will affect legal interpretation for decades and beyond. And I said that, and it's very, very, very true. Your grandkids, my grandkids may be affected by what laws are created today. And it's so important that we have people with hearts like us, the people I'm talking to. I'm not talking about them people that's all up there, because we do have some good people up there, but there's some bad people up there too. But if we want to make sure that these laws help us, we got to ensure that we put the right people in those positions. And so with that being said, and I see my thing is slowing down. With that being said, it's very, 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 very important for us to make sure we get the right people in play. It's very, very, very important for us to get the right people in play. Let me do something right quick because this might help out. So when we get into the weeds of things and we talk about how we want to move the narrative forward, we got to make sure we look at how things was and what we need to move the narrative forward. And I know this sounds like a stated conversation. I know it sounds like a redundant conversation, but it's a conversation I need to have today, because when I start having sophisticated power messages, I'm going to blame y'all because y'all didn't invite people to the simple conversations, because it's so important for everybody to be around for those simple conversations like the conversation we're having right now today. And so we've interpreted the 3 branches of government today. We understand that this year right here is not an election year for any of those branches. You will have all these branches on the ballot in 2022, though. And when we talk about that, and let me take that, on the state level and on the federal level, we'll have them on the ballot. This year, we have them on the local level in some of your municipalities across the state of Georgia. And we probably have some out there in Chatham, outside of Chatham County, that actually have these kind of elections for this time period. But that's what I really want to hear. DeJoy is there until 3 of the boards of governors of the PO term expire. Yes, that's correct. And so basically, when you talk about those kind of appointments, yes, we'll get DeJoy out of there eventually, because you have a different president in office that understands that he needs to get out of there. And Rebecca, you put something out there that was so important. A lot of these positions have terms. And when they get put in these terms, what we have to stop doing, especially on the local level and on the state level, is we got to stop waiting until the last hour of the last minute of the last second and trying to figure out who we want to replace these people with. Now, they do a great job on the federal level, because I'm almost certain when his time is up, they're going to have somebody for DeJoy to replace him. But when we talk about local conversations, we don't always have that. And it's always a pivotal point where people who will make great people to be put on these commissions and boards, they will be great fighters, but they don't step up, they don't get out there, and they're not willing to serve on these committees and boards and be the change agent. And the problem with a lot of these boards is because when you're talking about a 7-9 man board or 7-9 person board, and you got one seat coming open, You might be the only voice of reason for the people on that board until we can get the next term. And then the next term. And then the next term. And then the next term. Until we have termed everybody out. And then we've replaced everybody on that board to get the board where it's effective for the people. But where we mess up at is we don't have enough people willing to step up to get on these boards. I used to be, when I was a county commissioner, hey man, I want to be on the CAT board. You know why everybody wanted to be on the CAT board? It had nothing to do with fixing transportation. It had everything to do with CAT board is synonymous as far as one of the only boards in Chatham County that gets you a paycheck. You get a paycheck if you're on the CAT board. Did you also know on the board of tax assessors, you get a paycheck? So those are the two boards everybody wanted to be on because you got a paycheck for being on those boards. When we talk about the board of elections is an elected position, but you get a paycheck. When you talk about county commission, we talk about these positions, you get a paycheck. People didn't have no problem being on the boards with a paycheck, but people had problems being on the boards where it actually took effort and work, and you had to do work to be on that board, but you didn't get any kind of stipend, but you got to see your community change and get better for itself. And so when you look at that, when you look at these committees, see, a lot of we don't talk about it. So when you talk about these committees, when you talk about that, and I'm going to come back down to our localized government. I spoke on it earlier, and I'm going to speak from a place where I know. I serving as a former county commissioner, I understood how boards were effective. We had 47 boards that reported under the auspices, meaning we got to appoint 47 boards. Some of these boards were localized in the city of Savannah. Some of these boards were regional boards for the 1st Congressional District. Some of these board appointments for the whole state. Some of these boards talked about the hospital authority, where we made decisions, where we didn't make decisions on the hospital stuff, but we made appointments to the board where they made decisions. We also made decisions as far as putting people on CEDA, Savannah Economic Development Authority. That's another board that we were able to put appointments to. You know, the other boards we made appointments to, I said the hospital, the homeless authority, that's another board. The county made appointments to Chatham Area Transit, the transit authority that represents this area right here. The county makes 6 appointments. The city of Savannah makes 2, and Garden City makes 1. Did you hear how that power stroke played? Because the county is the main authority that controls what the narrative is with Chatham Area Transit. The housing authority and the airport authority are authorities of the city of Savannah. Chatham County don't have anything to do with that. That's tied to the municipality of Savannah, Georgia. And those appointments come from the city of Savannah. MPC has 12 appointments. And I'm talking about the Metropolitan Planning Commission, the commission that gives the understanding of what we need to do when it comes to zoning issues in our community. MPC, 6 appointments come from the city of Savannah. 6 appointments come from the county, because the MPC represents the county and the city of Savannah. Now, for all those people who aren't novelists, when we get into 102, I'm going to tell you how important the MPC is, because the MPC right now is tied to drawing the lines for the county as far as the 8 districts are concerned. That affects the school board, which is also an executive authority I did not mention, and the county. And so those lines will be effective, and they're going to draw the lines, but they still have to be approved by the state legislature. And so when you talk about these lines, when you talk about the growth, because how important those lines are is this: when those lines are drawn and then they go up to state legislature and they get approved, right? That means that you may be living in one area today. In 2022, you may say that Commissioner 5 is my commissioner, but in 2022, Commissioner 8 may be your commissioner coming up real soon. That's why it's so important for us to participate in the census tract, because the census tract is what determines what the population shift and the growth is for our community. That's why it's so important to go to these city town hall meetings, these city commit city meetings, the county meetings. It's so important to go to these meetings because they're making decisions on zoning tracts. They're not just approving liquor licenses, and they're not just approving how this resident is to be zoned commercial or resident. Their total job in these executive roles is to make decisions that affect your life. They can make something like a house in your neighborhood into a commercial development. And what that does is that changes the tax structure in your community. But if you don't understand how the executive power has executive rule in your community, you're going to suffer, because once they make that unit a commercial, then that means everything on that strip or along that street now has the opportunity to become commercial. And it also can drive up your taxes. It also can change the effect of how you live and how you move. And so that's why it's so important to understand the legislative body, the executive body, and judicial body. And not just understand them in the terms of how they are for the federal government, but how they affect you locally. And if you notice, I ain't got to mention no names, because you know what? If you understand government, if you understand how your makeup of your government is, then all you got to do is put the names to those faces, those bodies, and then you can understand the maneuverability and why things like our community shifts and game plans don't play in the favor of how black communities are being treated in America. And I want to be clear. Chatham County is not problematic to Chatham County, or Savannah, Georgia ain't just problematic to Savannah, Georgia. This is a national issue, national problems. And my thing is, I commend those who fight it on the local level, because if you understand anything about me, I believe that all politics is local. If we're not effective local, we can't be effective regional. We can't be effective countywide. We can't be effective statewide. And we dang sure can't be effective on the executive branch as far as the federal government is concerned. And so if we want to change, we have to change our narrative minds to understand who affects us in the executive branch, who affects us in the judicial branch, and who affects us in the legislative branch. The legislative branch writes the laws. The executive branch enforces the laws, and the judicial branch interprets the laws. If we don't have people who understand the needs of people in all three branches, we're going to continue to fail as a society. And so I implore you not just to look at federal politics. You have localized politics that affects your bottom line. And I know the top of my bottom line, his name is Johannes Jones. And that means my top of the line is the school board, and how school board politics, that executive branch, that legislative branch, how they maneuver, how they works for the betterment of us as a people. And so it's so important when those elections come around that I don't just talk to those people, because I'm going to tell you right this. If I talk to 2 or 3 people and they don't communicate with me, you ain't got to worry about me finding somebody to run. If I can run my dang self, I'll run against them. And that's the mentality you have to have when it comes to government. Because when government does good, you congratulate them, you pat them back. But when they do bad, you call them out and you replace them if need be. And that is something that's the mentality we got to adapt. Whether you got $2 in your pocket, $200 in your pocket, or $2 million in your pocket. That's the mentality you have to have. Whether you black, whether you white, whether you're Indian, whether you're Hispanic, whatever, not whether you're a woman, whether you're a man, whether you're LGBTQ, whether you are straight, whether you understand politics, whether you don't understand politics. This is a conversation we all must have, because if elected leaders are not speaking to any of those narratives I just spoke of, then we're not going to get anywhere. Not going to get anywhere. We have to make sure we're doing due diligence to move our narrative forward. And so I am at the 50-minute mark, y'all. I am at the 50-minute mark. And what I like to do at the 50-minute mark is I like to answer any questions. I ask y'all again, because I know I'm from Chatham County. I ask y'all again, give me narratives that affect us on the federal terms, not just localized conversation. Because my thing is, we need to understand the federal conversation, and then I can tell you in pragmatic terms of how we need to endure locally. But what we need to do right now is have a better understanding, because right around the corner, and I will say this, in the state of Georgia, we are up for an uphill battle in the state of Georgia. And I will talk about this. We have 1 or 2 senators who is going to be in the seat, who is going to be running again in 2022. And when he runs, it's going to be a very, very, very nationwide monitored race. And why is that? Because right now you have 48 Democrats in the House, and he is one of the 48. And we cannot afford to lose 1 Democrat in the House, because if we lose that 1 Democrat in the House, that can hurt us ultimately, where we have to go across the aisle to get somebody who may not be representing us to actually buy in. And what that means is we got to shave the ice off of what the things we want to make sure we get those things. And we don't want to do that no more. What we want to do is we want to have a majority in the seat so we can move our narrative forward. And it is so important for us to do that. So I did all that to say this. I am looking for those questions. I am looking for those people. What do you want to talk about in the next couple of weeks? Because it's so important for us to make sure that we are addressing those conversations. Someone had texted me and said, Jay, I think that we need to really do a good, thorough job of breaking down the different branches of government. And so that's why I took the day to make sure we break down the different branches of government. Yes, those branches of government play into how everything goes underneath those branches of government. Government is no different from structures of private industry. The only difference is private industry, those people are hired. In general terms with us, we hire them by who we vote. And besides vote, okay, so Glenada, besides voting, how can citizens influence district lines? I've been to a few redistricting info sessions, but still don't understand how we can affect the outcomes. It seems like we are always behind. And you're absolutely right. And I'm glad you brought that up. And I can talk about that right now. And I ain't got to look for next week. The issue with that, Glenada, is this. When you draw the lines, you don't start drawing the lines in 2020. You draw the lines in 21 for 2030. That's the goal. When we start looking at these lines, when we get whatever we get, whether it be November 3rd for the U.S. Congress and the state Senate and the state House, or whether it be for county commission, whether it be for the city of Savannah next year, or whether we get for any municipality, and I'm talking about my local area now, what we got to do is when we get the map, we got to do what we don't normally do. You know what we normally do? We spend 5 years complaining about what they gave us. Now, if you want to do that, do that. I ain't stopping you. When I get the map, what I'm going to do is I'm going to strategically look at the areas that affect my term, my narrative, and I'm going to find those votes so I can make sure I get the right representation when it comes time for the election season to happen. I'm going to stay proactive. I'm not going to go back and complain about a map that was written in 2018 that was presented in 2021 and then voted on, and they already have all the answers to all your questions. We got to stop that. That's the issue. We're behind because we're always playing the behind game. What we have to do is move the narrative forward. And what you have to do is when those lines are written, you need to start planning on what we need to do moving forward to replace those people in those positions. If it's a countywide position, it doesn't matter because guess what? Those lines don't draw. Those don't change. But if you're talking about the city of Savannah, I use that. If you're talking about the 6th district, let's say the 6th district inherited one community but lost another community. Then what we need to do is immediately bring that community into our community and talk to those forward-thinking people so we can start pressing the issue so when the next election comes, you're already on the same page and you're already moving the narrative forward. Because let me tell you something. Economics is doing this. The people aren't. And that's why we're always behind, Glenada. And so I hope I answered your question. Are there anything else that you need me to talk about? I hope I answered your question, Glenada. Is there anything else we need to talk about? Well, with that being said, hey, I want us to all understand, we can control our narrative. But what we have to do is we have to be forward-thinking people. We have to understand the judicial branch is the interpretation branch. They evaluate the laws. They do all that stuff. The legislative branch, they're the ones who make the laws. They're the ones who put the laws into effect. So whoever their mentality is, whoever those people are, they're going to make laws that benefit them or their narrative. And the last one is the executive branch. The executive branch is the one who enforces the law. All three of these bodies, for the most terms, are voted on by us. And it's upon us to make sure we go out there and put the right people in play. I thank you, Ms. Hills. The other thing is, what examples can we find to see how to address issues that specifically affect our neighborhood? Number one, if you live in a neighborhood long enough, you ought to know what those main issues are. And you ought to know how and when and what you need to do to address it. Unfortunate thing about it is, we, especially in the African American community, our older generation, our older population has assumed power, and we have a struggle of making sure power moves from one generation to another generation to another generation. And that's a conversation I don't want to go deep into detail about, but what we have to do to overcome that conversation is we just have to keep running people who are going to change the narrative, who are going to affect the change, that are going to push what we need to be pushing forward. And so when you ask for an example, what example can we find to see how to address issues that specifically affect the neighborhood? First off, you need to understand the niche issues that affect your neighborhood. And when you address those issues to affect the neighborhood, the best thing I can ever tell anybody to do, and I done told you this 1,000 times, Ms. Gwen, the best thing you can ever do is make sure you document everything. And when documentation, the best means of documentation in the 21st in 2021 is sending the email. Now, I'm gonna tell you just like this: they're gonna ignore the email the first time. They're gonna ignore it. They may ignore the email 20 times, but when come election season, you show all 20 of them emails, and you find a candidate who can push your emails. Then guess what? You will win. But you can't win trying to fight them at the day of battle. You have to be strategic. When you go into war, if you go to war with the sun, with a sword, and that person got a gun, you're going to lose. But if you understand your opponent when you go to war, and they got a gun and you got a tank, you will defeat them every single time there is. It is what it is, y'all. It is what it is. But it don't have to be that way. We have to be willing to be the ones who change our narrative. I don't care if it's 2 people, 1 people, or no people. Listen to what I got to say. I'm going to keep being the voice of the people, because the people need a voice who really understand and is really willing to listen what their message is. I only got 50 seconds. I'm making sure that my producer understands all that. We're getting ready to sign out, y'all. If y'all need me, call me. Yes, Betty Jones. We need change agents, because we need to break the is what it is complex. And the only way we're going to do that is making sure we find those change agents that are willing to change our community. I thank y'all for showing up. Tune in next week. ATR got a platform of shows. This will be rerun 2 or 3 times, but tune in next week, 8 o'clock. I expect to see you there. And please make sure you bring a friend. Peace out. See y'all later.